Hey everyone, I'm Zach Wheeler. Today I'm going to be teaching on Mark 10:42 through 45, some great, really deep verses where Jesus really gets to an issue that every human deals with, and that's how can I be great? How can we be great? And how can we have significance in the kingdom of heaven? And the way that Jesus defines significance is very different from the way that our society and our culture defines greatness and significance. But before we get there, it's important to set the context for these verses, for verses 42 through 45. If we pull things out of context in the Bible, we can really make the Bible say whatever we want. And so we always want to look at the context of the verses that we're teaching from. And so if we hop back to verse 32, kind of paints the picture of what's going on here. And so Jesus is heading up to Jerusalem, and he lets the disciples know that when we get there, when we get to Jerusalem, I'm going to be killed. The Son of Man is going to be delivered over to the rulers of the city and then handed over to the government of this city. And he will be arrested, he'll be beaten, he'll be tortured by being flogged, and ultimately he will die. He'll be killed. But he doesn't end there. He gives the disciples hope, and he says, but on the third day, after 3 days, the Son of Man, I will rise again. And so they're walking up to Jerusalem, and Jesus says this. And James and John, two brothers, come to him, and they ask him this question. He says, if we look at 35, verse 35, they say, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you? You know, you guys, you're my disciples. What do you want me to do?" And they go on and they say, in verse 37, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." And so they just come right out with this question. And in this context, it's and in their culture, what they're asking for is prominence. They're asking for power. Jesus, if you are king, when you're glorified, when you're high and lifted up, when you're on your throne, let us sit next to you. Let us sit at your right hand and your left hand. And so it's a big ask. And so what Jesus says goes on to say this. You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I'm baptized? And they say, we are able. And Jesus said to them, the cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. And so Jesus says to them, you know, that's not my place to give it to you guys. It's already been prepared by my Father. I can't give you guys that. Now we have to remember that, you know, these two, James and John, they went up and they asked Jesus in front of the other 10 disciples. And these, you know, they weren't perfect. They were just men. And so you can imagine the jealousy, the what verse 41 says, the indignation, the, you know, kind of, who do they think they are? Who do James and John think they are? Do they think they're better than us, that they go and they ask him? And so Jesus, perceiving all of this and looking out and seeing this, you know, this quarreling that's beginning in his disciples, he sees to the very heart of what James and John are asking. Jesus, we want to be great. We want to sit next to you. We want, you know, we want prestige. We want power. We want greatness. We want to be significant. And we know that you're the King of Kings, and so we want to sit next to you. So he addresses this very issue, lest there be confusion as he's laying the foundations for the church, lest there be any confusion or any debate from this point on. And he addresses the issue of greatness. And this is what he said, noticing this fighting that's starting to begin. Starting in verse 42. It says, "And Jesus called them to him and said to them," so he calls the disciples to himself, 12, and he says this, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to be served." He says, came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So the Son of Man, he came not to be served, but to serve. And so right here, Jesus is redefining greatness to the disciples. He's letting them know this is what greatness looks like in the kingdom. It's humility. It's serving one another. Matthew 18 parallels this verse. The disciples are quarreling over who will be greatest. And Jesus, in the midst of their fighting, he pulls a child in front of them. And he says, whoever humbles themselves like this child will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So greatness in the kingdom is diametrically opposed to greatness in the world. And they're completely different. A few days later, they would see Jesus depict and display the very essence of this greatness. The Last Supper, he would get up, he'd disrobe, and taking the lowliest form of a servant, he would wash his disciples' feet. Later that night, while their feet were still cleaned, they would go to the Mount of Olives, and there Jesus would be arrested. He would be beaten, he would be mocked, he'd be flogged, he'd be crucified. He'd give his life for them. Now this is the clearest depiction, this is the theme of this verse, the clearest depiction of greatness. When we look to Jesus and what he did at the cross. It's a Jewish man hanging from a Roman cross, disfigured beyond recognition. That the sins of man, that the sins of those he loved so dearly would be forgiven. In that moment, Jesus redefined greatness. And we all long to be great, don't we? We all want to change the world. We all want to have significance. It's intrinsic to our very nature. We're born with this desire that's displayed by James and John. And how are we defining greatness? How, at this moment, how are you defining greatness? Maybe, it's how well can I do in school, in my classes? If I can make the dean's list, I can be great. Maybe it's how high we can climb the corporate ladder. If I can build my business into a Fortune 500 company, if I can be the CEO of a big company and make millions, I'll be great. I'll be significant. If my dad, if I hear him say, "My earthly father, I'm proud of you," I'll be great. Maybe it's fortune and fame. For me, I'm a musician. I work in a studio and I play in the Atlanta area. And, for me, again and again, I struggle to define my success by fortune and fame. If I can just play on one hit, if the studio I'm working in, if we can produce one hit, I'll be great, I'll be significant. If I can get on the next big tour, I'll be great, I'll be significant. But this is counter to the gospel, and it's counter to what Jesus is saying. It's counter to his message in these verses. He's saying greatness is defined through serving, through laying down your life for others. This is the key. He's saying Greatness is defined by making others great, not yourself. This is what Jesus did at the cross. He humbled himself. He laid his life down that we might enter into the family of God. He laid his life down to redeem us, to restore our relationship with the Father, that we might be sons of the Most High. And so it's from here that we need to remember that, it's not wealth, it's not possessions, it's not position. It's not position that makes us great. It's a heart of serving others. It's seeing others better than yourself. Again, it's making yourself as a servant to make others great. And so, whatever that looks like for you, whether you're, working an office job or you're a dad, like me, I'm also a dad. It's serving my wife. It's, waking up with our 3-week-old in the middle of the night so she can sleep, and feeding that baby so she can sleep. Even though I don't want to get out of bed, I want to get that rest, but realizing she needs it. She needs it. Serving others. It's putting others' needs before our own. And so that's greatness in the kingdom. That's the heart of this text that Jesus is talking about. And so I pray that this becomes true in your life. And so that's my teaching. I hope it blesses you, and have a great day.